The moon has crested high and is very close to the pale line of the cascade which runs clear and unbroken across the expanse of the night, a gently flickering line. Soon, the moon will pass behind the cascade itself, and the eclipse will be a band of black picked out over its pale face. I dream about the moon, the old solitary watcher. If one consults the Ruerdskyeg, that being the holy book from far south across the sea that I was raised with, it will tell you that the moon is the gate to the world of the dead, or, in some readings of the holy texts, it itself, the country of those who have passed beyond, the plains of heaven. I've found that the Northern Book of Knowings holds the moon in no less stead, but for a very different reason. It says that it was the birthplace of God themselves, who then went on to fashion the cascade across the sky as their home, out of the stone from the white mountains of its surface, so as to watch over all the earth. I doubt that up there they have a need for things such as wars and borders and trade routes, or journalists to scuttle across them. As of right now, the moon and the cascade affront it are my only companions. I am out in the front yard of the Ruerdskyeg, looking down onto the town. The same evening that I left you last, with the story of my visit to the physician's hall. Here and there, orange light glows in the windows of some houses, but largely, Sokvaapit is quiet and dark. I see there is still activity in the mast house. A coppice of masts, antenna, and mechanisms on the high roof, still winking with red lights, and white, harsh beams streaming from its small high windows. Egren Loetum, hard at work. Further down into the town, at the quay, the ship, the Ruerdskyeg, has its deck lights lit. And at the aft, I see the small light of a window that I know to be the captain, a man named Giflid Moiten. He has not joined his crew for the evening's celebrations. Most of the town is in the Ruerdskyeg, as is much of the crew of the Ruerdskyeg, and many from the expedition too, though Intimu Hoik and his inner circle have not yet made an appearance. The celebrations are still in full swing and reaching their peak. I found it was beginning to become too hot to think, let alone write. I also saw the physician Glabvyokta and thought it best to avoid a direct confrontation. Though there has been no mention at my somewhat reckless entry into the House of Healing and my questioning of Mr. Wipter Mvokshi. The lad is clearly happy to maintain the lie that I simply went in to wish him well and sing him a few songs of healing as a token of good faith from this strange caravan of lowlanders that Sokvaapit has done its utmost to welcome. I'll have to repay him somehow, once he recovers. Now, I know you'll have to edit this out, but before I continue, I want to speak directly to you, Orn, and whoever else is with you in that cramped little office in Slen poring over my words. I do hope you're satisfied. This is turning into just the type of high drama that I'm sure will be lapped up on the evening circuit. And for the sake of my own curiosity and my journalist's integrity, I feel I have no choice but to chase it down and serve it up to you by the pageful. It seems we arrived here at a significant time. My visit to the physician's hall was an unnerving one, to say the least. Like everything I have learnt since we have ascended into the Shelflands, it has raised more questions than it answered. While the expedition is at a standstill and I have time on my side, I'm going to pull at every thread I can find. Whether that fulfills the exact remit set out by your company, I have accepted that I couldn't care less. I'm half a world away now. Short of whipping your paymasters on me, what exactly are you going to do? No, there's something amiss here in Sokvaapit, just out of reach. Who or what it was that set upon the boy Weepter and his friends in the woods is something that I am still speculating on. Though there is much murkiness to push back, a single line of questioning has been established. What was the conversation that took place between the ringleader Jansh Gevedru and Igren Loetum, which spurred them to abandon their home and take the road east into the trees? In pursuit of that knowledge, I need to pay another visit to the Loetum woman in the mast house. When that will be is another matter, as currently the siren requires constant attention from all cloud tellers. The rain is on its way, and no mistake. Though tonight the sky is clear, the warm winds that carry through the cobbled streets and throw closed the open windows make one thing clear. A great downpour approaches. Once it is here, I might have my chance to speak to her. For now, though, I have plenty to tell. Both of those I have met in and around Sokvaapit, and what might have happened in the forest. The grim news of the fate of the 6 young companions who were attacked on their journey is spreading. That this incident should occur so close to the borders of the town, but a few days' walk, has provoked a mixed response. Although there is lamentation on the part of some, and reasonable concern, there are many too who see it as an inevitable result of the impulsivity of youth, and an act of reckless individualism. The main families of station in the town of Sokvaapit are the Hundaleks, the Gevedru, and the Loetum. Each of them have offered their own personal statement as to their feelings on the matter. The Loetums, of whom Igren in the mast house is numbered among, have been most solid in their condemnation of the act. Unsurprising, as they are the only family without blood in the game. Jansh, the instigator, was a Gevedru, and he seems to have been fed in his youth on stories of the pre-war splendour of Ruerdskyeg and the old Shelfland kingdoms. And Teherge Hundalek currently languishes a comatose amputee in the physician's hall. This leaves the Lowatums as the ones without any double standards to concern themselves with. And the presiding matriarch, Halipe Lowatum, Egron's mother, and the head of the Sokvaapit smithing guild, has denounced the act, and I quote, as symptomatic of a lapsed moral fortitude. Pithy. As far as many of Sokvaapit are concerned, the transgression committed in their leaving means a ceremony of collective mourning would be inappropriate. The common standard, in its traditional reading at least, apparently dictates a rigorous and unwavering commitment to the wider community on the part of the individual. And for many here, abandoning your home in such a way sparks little sympathy. Popular opinion as to what actually happened out on the road through the parent wood, though, is less distinct. Most do put it to the age-old stories of the most hated. Untangling exactly what they are has been something of a taxing endeavour. I have heard many theories. These are but a few. The official line that the forecastocracy takes is that they are radicals, degenerates, outcasts and criminals from the Titsibani Plateau to the north, who make a mummery of being old forest peoples, shrouding their petty banditry in a convenient myth. Of all the possibilities, right up until my meeting with Weeptir and his description of the assailant, this one seemed the most likely. Now, I'm not so sure. Other ideas become a little more lurid and fantastical. A conclave of heathen cannibals taken to worshipping the shade. An army who forsook their fealty to the Ruerdskyeg dynasty in a forgotten conflict before the unification and fled into the trees. Some more imaginative sorts say that they are in fact a division of the NRF, capitalizing on these years of silence from the Ruerdskyeg to strengthen their southern borders. This would add up to the official party line from the forecastocracy and take it further, within a stone's throw of an accusation of an act of war. But it doesn't take into account the fact that the stories of the most hated have been around longer than the mere century and a half since the NRF established their border in the northern plateaus. One old charcoal burner I met, a little way up the river, had an extravagant and outlandish take. She said that they had always lived in the woods, long before the Shelflanders named them most hated. Before even the first ascent to the shelves by the ancestors of those who now call this country home. That the Skiegan, the people here in Sokvaapit, are in fact the invaders. The idea that a people could come about of their own accord without a known link to the cradle lands is laughable, if not blasphemous, to most. Theories that operate on the scale of centuries and millennia and rely in part on what some would deem heretical are not, as you can imagine, overly popular. What is, and has always been, incredibly popular, however, is a scapegoat. When a child goes missing in the woods, when a flock takes ill, a harvest fails, these things are all attributed to the work of the most hated. That the forest of the Ruerdskyeg is vast, and much of it uncharted, and that it has always been home to many outcasts and violent separatists, ever since people have dwelt here in the shelves, is of no dispute. All of the stories that I have just recounted may be true, and still not contradict the others, and need to do more digging. There are endless theories, but the most convincing and complete account I have heard of an actual encounter with the most hated has come from the figure who came and found me on the scree slope above the ruins of the mine, the one who interrupted the second missive. He has proven to be an odd old sort and invaluable to my understanding of certain aspects of local history. He is, in fact, the captain of the Haskalia, Giflid Moetan. He was very keen to talk to me specifically. He first went to the place where our expedition had camped, on the southern side of town by the river, and got speaking with Ufrelgvi of all people. Hoik was deep in his tent, in discussion with Reed and the other financiers. But Ufrelgvi, our resident gabbler, was more than happy to tell him of our trials and of our long way from Slen, of Ruerdskyeg being our intended destination beyond the forest, and of the fact that a migratory was among our number. When the captain heard of this, he left hurriedly and spent a good hour hobbling about town asking after me, before a young shepherd off her shift told him that she had seen me heading up the old track to the mine. When he found me, and after some brief talk, Moetan told me to meet him aboard his ship once his business in Sokvaapit had been attended to. In the end, I could never have known how much he'd say, or how much I wouldn't have been able to write up. As I said, he's indisposed this evening, checking over every last detail of his ship, preparing for tomorrow's departure. I have quite a lengthy account of our conversation that I think our listenership would find most enlightening. That is, if any of it's left, after the butchery that I'm sure will have to be committed to get it past the censors. I'll send it after the rest of my findings. In the days after my visit to the physician's hall to see Wipter and Terge, and while I was waiting to meet with Captain Moetan, my attention turned to the wider populace, in the winding alleys and cobbled squares and the modest dwellings of any who would let me in. You can learn a lot when you put in the steps. I have met many, too many to name in my comings and goings. Several goat-herding families, 2 myco-remediation technicians, whose work I found fascinating, if a little opaque. I met a woman who had come from a stumpland town that our expedition passed through back in the west. She followed our trail here to find work down in the spore paper mill, after what was apparently an inspiring conversation with our own Timur Hoik himself. On the banks of the river, near the bridge, I met a stonemason, their partner, and their sister, all 3 returning from a hunt across the river below the branches of the Ruerdskyeg. They had been away for many days and had not heard of the commotion involving the survivors of the tragedy further into the forest and the rumours of the most hated. They sat with me, glad to be back within the boundaries of the town, and we had fine talk. They told many stories of the town, of the river trade, and of hunting in the lighter, younger woods before the true parenthood begins. They had an irreverent, familial manner, and when it transpired, that they wrote and acted plays for their street to attend on nights when the Ubliaska is used for other, less entertaining matters. The unnamed kindred that is often felt when artists meet. It prevailed. And we spent a good few hours in the nuance of our process, of our ambitions, and the self-admonishment of our vanity. I have never attempted to write for the stage, but it is an intriguing thought. Perhaps one day I'll be able to dramatize the Hoik expedition, once this is all over. It could very easily amount to a vast gulf of conversationless walking. I and my new friends ended the night laughing and singing and leaping about a bonfire of scrap wood down in a silent avenue of the warehouse district. I was surprised to find that the stonemason named Hangrach comes originally from Slen, having in their youth walked the same road that our expedition has come by. When I told them of the logging town buried under a landslide that we had passed through, they muttered a prayer and said that they remembered it well, having worked there for a while during a period of intermittent rain fronts. He remembered that the warden there had always been a just and level-headed woman, and wondered what it was that had pushed her to order the dangerous felling of the higher slopes. That town was known as Langvid, and it was to Langvid that we raised our final toast that night, among the corrugated corridors between the warehouses. I met a potter named Brinkipli, who had some fascinating things to say regarding the confluence of practical and artistic function in Sokvaapit. He bid me not write it down, however, for he planned to release it as an essay, to be broadcast within 3 masts worth and hopefully bring some younger people to the art. His arguments were convincing, if at times a little abstract, but the common standard seemed to be in his heart with it. At least art is alive here, if by nothing else than a byproduct of practicality. For I find that craftspeople who see the work of their hands and back in a truly artistic sense are a rare thing. These craftspeople are artists of a kind, one and all. I usually think art to be the manipulation of the physical and the imagined world in order to incur a change in emotion. And who is not cheered by a steaming cup of tea? A goat herd and her younger brothers that I met in the higher pastures served me a scalding hot brew of nettles in some of that same Brinkipli's work. I was invited in after I came upon them calling back the goats on one of my solitary rambles up the furthest lanes on the fells around Sokvaapit. They invited me in to their long stone cottage, and we talked all afternoon of the seasons and of back west, and of the degradation that we saw as our expedition passed through the lower Shelflands. How deer and mammoth and woolly rhino come and go less and less on this side of the river, and that the rain comes ever more readily, hard enough to drain you in the blink of an eye on some particularly bad days. Only the wolves remain a constant, growing thinner and fewer and bolder year by year. They were once hunted, but never culled beyond what the common standard would allow. Farmers on the Shelflands see losing a goat here and there as an act of tribute to the spirits, and a natural part of the turning of life beneath the cascade. As family, they told me that nobody from the nearest forecastocratic offices in the town of Barrow to the south had come this way in 3 years. That it was only now Igran Luetum who mediated Sokvaapit's connection with the rest of the world. That a man with iron tusks and no nose, who they knew was NRF but had the good sense not to ask, came through their holdings a few months prior, just before a spell of bad weather. They had welcomed him in, and he had sat and was very gracious with them, and together they had played and exchanged songs, drunk urch by the light of the stove, and listened to the sound of wolves in the south on a close, sodden night. He left on the road south to Barrow, the road that follows the river, to where it flows wide and slow down through the steppe. That long, almost imperceptible descent, league upon league, shelf upon shelf, until the smog-sheeted spread of a young city can be glimpsed, tall and grim, Yalbpo, rising from the sea over the continental terminus. Where he was going, the man did not say. The thought of such a journey on foot is a rough idea. South. They say that it is a barren country of mean populace, for the southeasterly winds from the open ocean and the long-eaten forests have made much of its stump and mud far before the lands to the west of Sokvaapit began to join it, and the villages and towns there have all but gone quiet and still, and the people flock to the great towers and swinging bridges and burning columns of Yalbpo. Their broadcasts speak of 100 towers and 100,000 windows glittering in the sun high above the sea, of forests under glass halls to rival even those crystalline rainforest cathedrals in my home of far Canth. For Yalbpo, they say it is built in this new way of making that the dirt office has devised, that turns sand and scree into foundations and walls, bridges and streets, up and up and up it goes. So they say. When I began to speak of Yalbpo, of matters beyond the town, there was a change in the air of the little cottage. The herders told me that they lost their youngest sibling, one who had not even reached the age of gendering. When I asked how, the eldest sister rested her face into her palm and stared out the window down onto Sokvaapit and sagged her shoulders. She exhaled deeply, and nobody spoke. At this I apologized hastily, and her brother interjected and told me that I had made no imposition, but only that it was difficult for her to speak right now, because of the boat that is still docked at the quay, the Ruerdskyeg. I realized then that their sibling had not been taken by disease, or accident, or rain, or shade, but that they had left them freely, south, on board a ship not unlike the Ruerdskyeg. Though it would seem in full affront to the traditions of the common standard, many who have family here, both in blood and in bond, are giving them up to go downriver to Yalbpo. It is seen by some, and posited by the broadcasts of the forecastocracy, to be a pilgrimage into the new life of all peoples across the shelves. They say that if holy and Svangd, in my country, south across the sea, is where God departed from this earth, then Yalbpo is where they shall return, for it will be a shrine city that will shine so brightly that it will be seen even from the far cascade above. So they say. Anyway, the promise of steady work and good food and the company of like-minded individuals about your own age is all many seem to need. The boat takes the young, and it returns things those who choose to stay need to continue, for a price. I have gone back inside the Ubliaska, into the heat, the noise and the din. Always I have sought solitude to write and record these, but something drew me back. The band hammers away. The crowd is roiling. The air is close and brittle. The glade, formed of the twin colonnades that line the great hall of the Ubliaska, is heaving from wall to wall. The central cooking fire and the roasting pit is a bank of embers, a beating mound, a cairn pulsing crimson. Dancers and watchers are indistinguishable. The crew of the Haskalia are well among the townspeople, and many more from the expedition have finally begun to emerge too. I see friends, Itep and Ain, both caravaneers. Finza, I think she's an ex-soldier, and Darag, one of the cloud tellers, junior to read. They are sat towards the back, more sedate part of the hall, where the eating and the talking is done, and the cushions and blankets and soft light is hung with smoke. They are lounging by a small drum fire, mingling with the locals. Company comes quickly in Sokvaapit. There's plenty more of us about them, even some whose names I forget now. I see Samir, a financier whose exact trade I've never quite established, and Ifrelgvi too, in a nest of skins and colourfully embroidered blankets. They are wreathed in strig smoke and sitting opposite each other, cross-legged and leant forward, staring very intently into each other's eyes. I think they're playing the weeping game. Of Intimu Hoik and his fellows, though, I have seen no sign. Nor of the pillar, who I saw arrive very late that night that we too entered Sokvaapit. The existence of who I've begun to feel that I might have imagined or dreamt, unless they have remained sequestered in one of the highest chambers in the Ubliaska. I asked an elderly couple, Fieglin and Ami, about it. They were the two elders who were on clean-up the morning after I saw the Godborn arrive. And they laughed at me and said that if a pillar had come into their midst, that there would have been talk aplenty, and that half the town would have been at the door to pay tribute. I snaked around the edge of the crowd and past Finza and Itep. They smiled and asked me where I had been. I told them that I was simply taking the night air. I have stolen away up onto the balcony to write and transmit the rest of this in relative peace. I meant now to write of the captain Giflid Moiten, but I think he'll have to wait, for in the here and now something has arisen below me. There has been an altercation, a great shouting and hubbub. There is a dropping of plates and a gap is formed. Someone screams, there, about the largest cooking pit. All is lit by the mass of coals, and a man lies stricken by the fireside. He is from the boat, and he is older than his assailant, and with matted hair, an open bleeding forehead, and the other figure bends low over him and raises his arm to strike again and is pulled back. The struggling boy shouts in bitter protest. He moves in violence and comes free from his friends and then is held again. I get a better look at his face, and he is one of the goat-herding siblings I met in the stone cottage on the edge of the fells. His sister stands behind him, silent, hollow-eyed. The boy breaks from the grip of his friends again and makes to move towards the fallen crewman. And then the crowd parts and the boy turns and stops. And there is the smell of foreign scrim, juniper and resin, and something else beneath it, sweet and pungent, tangy, lingering. Intimu Hoik is here, and his retinue is close behind. All are silent now. Hoik moves through the gap in the watching crowd, down the stones to the roasting pit. He reaches without pause into the heat, and from the spitted, sizzling lamb pulls a whole haunch free. Then he kneels and calmly begins portioning the meat into bowls with a round-handled knife. The coals rasp and spit. The stricken man groans. Hoik raises his arm slowly and offers the food to the silent boy. Nobody moves. The boy looks away and bows his head and begins to cry.